Should a church have a whitelist of acceptable Bible translations? Hello, everyone. Thinking again about the recent visit I made to the Episcopal Missionary Church that is somewhat local to me, and I made a separate video regarding that visit. The Episcopal Missionary Church uses the Book of Common Prayer of 1928, the American 1928 prayer book, which is probably my favorite iteration of the prayer book. It's close enough to the 1662, but Americanized and some slight changes, revisions. Although it's not the prayer book I'm currently using for my own morning and evening prayer, I'm using the 1662 International Edition, which I highly recommend. But the 28 was the one that I have used most and really got me started using the prayer book. But what I wanted to talk about today is something else I found on the Episcopal Missionary Church website, and that has to do with the translations of Scripture, which are appointed to be read in the church for Holy Communion, morning and evening prayer services. Now, it's perfectly understandable to have a specified prayer book edition to be used in morning and evening prayer in the church and in the Holy Communion in the church, so that everyone is literally and figuratively on the same page. It would be rather chaotic and would kind of ruin the point of having a structured liturgy if everyone had their own prayer book version with them. But translations of the Bible, I think, is something different. And I'm wondering if your church, those of you watching, has a specified acceptable list of translations for use in the church. This is something I'm not familiar with. I was raised a Nazarene and still am a member and attender of the Church of the Nazarene. And I have never heard of having a specified white list, as it were, of acceptable Bible translations. Now, from the Episcopal Missionary Church website, it only indicates that the list of translations there is for use in the church. So when the priest is officiating at morning or evening prayer or at the Holy Communion, this list of translations are what are acceptable. So the the King James or Authorized Version, the New King James. First of all, here's the King James with Apocrypha. New King James, also acceptable. The 1952 Revised Standard Version in the New Oxford Annotated. One of my very favorite Bibles there. The New International Version, I was a little bit surprised to find that on the list. And maybe more surprising, the New English Bible. Oxford, Cambridge. So we have a list of acceptable Bible translations to be read in the church. I'm assuming it's perfectly acceptable for parishioners of that church to use in their own Bible study and reading at home, whatever translation they want. But for reading in the church, there's this list. Now, it almost makes more sense to have one approved translation, like the Authorized Version, which is what you would find in all the communion service readings here in the 1928 prayer book, or to have no list at all. But to have several of them seems a little counterintuitive to me, and I wonder, one, what you all think of that. for a church to establish this is a list of approved translations to be read in the church. Again, my church has no such list, and in my church you will find preaching from various translations, even the Message, which I am at best ambivalent about. It feels rather unserious, but that is a subject for another day. But there's no list. There's no white list. These are acceptable to read. So one, I guess, my first question, if I didn't already say, what do you think of this list? King James, New King James, Revised Standard, New International Version, and New English Bible. At first I thought they chose those five because they had the Apocrypha available on all of them. But is there an NIV with the Apocrypha? I've never seen that. There may be, that I'm just not aware of. Should have done more research on that. I don't think there is. But again, I could be wrong. Which, if it's trying to be the Bible that's all things to all people, which is, I think, what the NIV was intended for, that was its spoken purpose, then it should have the Apocrypha available. If you know whether it does or not, let me know. The other versions here do have the Apocrypha. And there are certain readings in the 28 prayer book from the deuterocanonical or apocryphal books. So, again, repeating myself. One, what do you think of that list? Two, what do you think of approved lists in general for public worship in the church? And three, if you like the idea of having lists, what would be on your list for reading in the church? And maybe talk a little bit about what criteria you would use to determine that. If it were me, one, I guess, major bit of criteria would be obviously fidelity to the text, but apart from the Message and and Bibles of that ilk, I'm not aware of any that are so far removed from the, from orthodoxy that would be an issue. But maybe more important, because that's assumed fidelity to the original meaning and text, the beauty, how it sounds when it's read aloud in the church. Because if you're picking a translation to be read aloud, it ought to sound good read aloud. And many of the ones among these five sound really good. The King James Version sounds magnificent read aloud in a church. The New King James, maybe slightly less so, but still perfectly acceptable. The Revised Standard, I love to hear read aloud, is a beautiful translation. I've not read enough in the New English Bible to say for certain how I feel about that. So, what do you think of this list? What do you think of lists of Bibles in general for a church? And what's your criteria for deciding what would be on your list? One last thing here before I go. The bulletin from the church that I attended just for a visit, the Episcopal Missionary Church, has and I realize they order these from some Bible material supply company. They order these blank bulletin forms to be used. So this wasn't their doing, but I just think it's funny that they have a scripture verse on the front. It is in the NIV, which admittedly is on their list, but it seems like the King James may have been more appropriate. Scripture taken from the Holy Bible, New International Version, and it's the 2011, which the website doesn't specify which NIV is the one they prefer. Anyway, thanks for listening to this today. The pencil I've been pointing with. Let's have a meeting about a meeting. This was sent to me by Go for a Ride, my pencil pal. Thanks for that. And there's some reviews of some other pencils he sent coming shortly. But let's have a meeting about Bibles. So in the comments below, let's have that meeting. Thanks for watching today. Hope to see you here again next time.